This was what Greensburg, Kansas, looked like on the afternoon of May 4, 2007. Night arrived, and with it, the first EF5 tornado of the 21st century. In just a few minutes, this is what the city became. Greensburg was unrecognizable. Metal forks and license plates, twisted by the tornado's unimaginable force, embedded themselves in tree trunks. Vehicles were thrown for blocks, crushed like soda cans, and everything was flattened, with the exception of two structures. Let's detail how the Greensburg tornado, with its 205 miles per hour winds, took the lives of 11 people, injured more than 60, and reduced nearly 95% of the town to rubble. Now is the time, Greensburg, to take your tornado precautions. You need to be in your shelters. This storm is knocking on your door. A confirmed large dangerous tornado. May 4, 2007 began like any other day for the residents of Greensburg. The weather wasn't pleasant, but this was Kansas, the heart of Tornado Alley. And as one resident said, "We live in Kansas, so you know, weather is bad all the time and you don't really think much of it." However, some people like Dennis McKenna were immediately aware of the dangerous weather that was brewing. It was one of those days where you just knew it wasn't good. The weather was unsettled. It was windy. You could tell the barometric pressure was low 'cause, you know, you'd hear the drains gurgling. And he wasn't wrong. Across the plains, the atmosphere was unstable, packed with energy, and primed for tornadoes to form. Storm chasers were on high alert, and many meteorologists were driving across Kansas with mobile Doppler radars, gathering crucial data to warn residents before it was too late. Meteorologists had been eyeing this pattern for days. In fact, it was expected that the next day, May 5, 2007, would be an outbreak day, when large storms could potentially produce multiple tornadoes. Well, this prediction turned out to be right. May 5 eventually brought a full-blown tornado outbreak. However, May 4 already had all the ingredients for trouble, too. And while it didn't produce as many storms as May 5, the day turned out to be the more disastrous of the two. Let's analyze all the pieces that came together. First, warm, humid air was rushing north out of the Gulf of Mexico, colliding with hot, dry air pushing in from the west. This classic clash creates what meteorologists call a dry line, which would serve as a guide for where storms could potentially erupt. On top of that, a powerful jet stream was screaming overhead, dipping down from the Rockies and pumping extra energy into the plains. That added the spark storms need to go from ordinary to explosive. The atmosphere was loaded, but the good news was that early in the day, the atmospheric cap held things together. A cap is a layer of warm air sitting above the surface. Think of it as something that suppresses early storm development. During the day, that cap did its job. It prevented storms from firing. But, like a double-edged sword, it unfortunately also let the atmosphere stockpile energy that would be unleashed when the cap was finally broken. By late afternoon, all the numbers were there. CAPE values were exceeding 4,000, even 5,000 in some areas. The bulk shear was around 40 to 50 knots, perfect for twisting storms into rotation. And there was a low-level jet waiting to roar to life after sunset, supercharging the wind field near the ground. However, throughout the morning and early afternoon, the cap kept holding strong. No broken cap meant no storms. For a while, it looked like Greensburg might just get another gloomy, windy night. Then, just after 5 p.m., a lone thunderstorm bubbled up along the Texas-Oklahoma border. At first, it didn't look like much, but then it split in two. One storm drifted left, the other turned right. The right split storm headed into Ellis County, Oklahoma. It quickly grew stronger, even producing a couple of tornadoes, but after an hour, it began to weaken. And as it died, it shed off yet another left split. Now, left splits are notoriously poor tornado producers. Most of the time they just spin away to the north and fizzle out. But this one began to hold together. By the time it crossed the border into Kansas, the original left split had died away. Yet the second one started consolidating, pulling in more energy and becoming a more organized supercell. For a few minutes, it looked like that storm might also lose steam. It even split one more time, which briefly stalled its intensification. But within minutes, the southern portion re-intensified and took on a far more ominous look. By 8:32 p.m., this forgotten left split, the one born from a weakening storm in Oklahoma, was now producing its first tornado northeast of Ashland, Kansas. More would follow, and by 9 p.m. radar was showing unmistakable signs of violent rotation. This was the fifth twister produced by the storm, and the very one that would trample Greensburg into nothingness. At first, forecasters and even storm chasers didn't think Greensburg was in the direct path. The supercell looked like it would pass just west of town. But as it neared peak width and strength, it shifted slightly to the left, putting Greensburg directly in the crosshairs. 9:15 p.m. In the middle of the dark night, the first tornado sirens were activated in Greensburg. You'd think this would have warned everyone to jump out of bed or the sofa and take cover, but you have to understand that people within tornado regions are used to hearing tornado sirens. These emergency alerts go off any time a twister is spotted, regardless of whether it's an EF0 or EF5. So, it's easy to imagine that dozens of residents ignored this loud warning. At first, at least. Here's how one of the residents explains living in Kansas. We've all been through it. The whistle is blowed and we all just kind of stand outside our doors and look at the clouds and go, oh, it isn't going to do anything. But anybody who tuned in closely to local weather updates would know immediately it was not time for guessing or hesitating. It was time to huddle up in the basement or a storm shelter and stay put until it's safe. By 9:45 p.m. the storm was zeroing in on Greensburg, and the next few crucial minutes were critical for meteorologists to get people into shelter. Now is the time, Greensburg, to take your tornado precautions. You need to be in your shelters. Your arrival time is imminent. This storm is knocking on your door. A confirmed large dangerous tornado from the National Weather Service. A tornado emergency now in effect for Greensburg in Kiowa County. Everyone knows the safest place to ride out a tornado is a basement. But not every home in Greensburg had one. Kelsey Schroth was one of the unlucky residents without a basement. At this critical moment, she faced two risky choices. Dash through the whipping winds to reach her neighbor's basement or stay inside with her 10-month-old son. After much deliberation, she attempted to reach her neighbor. But as she was about to leave her house, the wind's suction force made it impossible to go out the door. So, she picked up her son and huddled in the walk-in closet in their bedroom. Foam all around, silent, tense, heart racing, constant roaring all around. But that wasn't the worst. Kelsey could hear baseball-sized hail striking, the walls ripping apart, and the loud destruction consuming their surroundings. At this point, upon impact, the twister was already at its peak width of about 1.7 miles across. This made Greensburg smaller than the wedge itself. So, at some point, the entire tornado seemed to consume every single corner of the town. It only took about 10 minutes for this massive twister to level everything except for two buildings in the town of Greensburg. And while the tornado dissipated not long after, the damage had already been done. Residents who sought shelter in basements or bathrooms found themselves crawling not through doors, but over piles of rubble. It was dark and chaotic. But it was clear that the town they saw, after all the dark and loud chaos, was no longer the same one they had seen earlier in the day. The trees I've known my entire life, if you can recognize them. They were all twisted. There was bark off of them. Emergency workers rushed into town, helping survivors. Everyone was outside either crying, shouting, or searching for loved ones. Every available vehicle, including the good old yellow school buses, was utilized to transport residents to a temporary shelter, which for many was the school in the next town over. Kelsey's son, a 10-month-old, was the prioritized concern for Kelsey and her neighbors. He was supposed to be rushed to the hospital, but there was no longer any standing hospital in town. Somebody said, "Take him to the hospital to make sure they're okay." We didn't realize that there was no hospital. It was only the next morning that the full scope of the damage in Greensburg became clear. 500 homes and dozens of businesses were completely gone, splintered. Only 5% of the community remained recognizable. No landmark left in sight. Even longtime residents found it hard to navigate the place they had once called home. You're walking through your town, but you don't recognize it. Like all the landmarks that you're used to seeing, like so-and-so's house on that corner. The park should be right down after this house, but I don't see that house anymore. But even in the middle of this traumatic scene, many residents had to compose themselves and begin the search. Search for missing loved ones, for neighbors, or for anything they could possibly salvage from the ruins. It was as if someone clicked a reset button that erased 100 years of memories from the town. Greensburg had become a blank canvas again. The beloved Twilight movie theater was destroyed. The water tower, which was once a prominent landmark, was buried under debris. The 10,000-pound roof beam of Kiowa County Memorial Hospital was lifted and tossed onto a vehicle. Many cars had been shifted, rolled, or sent flying away from where they had once been parked. More than 240 trees were stripped bare and reduced to stubs, their branches turned into deadly debris. Major local businesses were wiped away along with machinery critical for farming, crippling the town's economic core. The list of destruction went on. This may sound a bit sensitive or controversial, but given the scale of destruction, it's almost a miracle that only 11 people lost their lives in this deadly EF5 tornado. After all, this was a town of over 1,000 people. It was Friday night, so most were in their homes, which were later flattened. This tornado was the first ever to be rated EF5 using the enhanced Fujita scale, which had been released just months prior in February of 2007. This rating represents the strongest possible tornado. And the Greensburg tornado, with its 205 miles per hour winds, which could turn kitchen forks into projectiles faster than a bullet and cause destruction that reduced 95% of the town to nothingness, truly deserved this rating. Luckily, this disastrous event didn't destroy the spirit of Greensburg forever. Soon after, the community found hope and courage to rebuild. When the canvas became blank again, you could paint that community any way you wanted it. Instead of dwelling on the fact that 95% of what it was gone forever, Greensburg turned the destruction into opportunity. This was a chance to rebuild and customize 95% of the town the way they wanted to. An opportunity that rarely presents itself anywhere else in the world. And true to the name of Greensburg, the town as a collective decided that it was time to paint the town green. It was time to become a sustainable, eco-friendly community that relied 100% on renewable resources. At first, this ambitious vision wasn't embraced by everyone. When they first started proposing green, I really thought it was a gimmick, to be perfectly honest with you. But eventually, those plans became reality. Little by little, the future took shape. After the debris cleanup procedures, more than 200 trailers were brought into town to serve as temporary housing for residents. And as the community regained its footing, the rebuilding effort was now a step that the community supported as a whole. The plan of rebuilding into an eco-town caught the attention of many celebrities and environmentalists, including Leonardo DiCaprio, who eventually produced the documentary show called Greensburg that covered the town's complete transformation into a sustainable, eco-friendly community. This project jump-started the much-needed financial support and attention for the reconstruction. Suddenly, this wasn't just a small-town project anymore. It was in the spotlight, and it became a project not of a small town but the entire nation's, managed by renowned leaders from many different sectors. Now Greensburg runs on 100% renewable energy, all day, every day. It's the first city in the U.S. to have all of its streetlights powered by LED. Every bit of its electricity comes from wind energy. The city also implements water recycling systems and constructs new buildings using reclaimed materials. Of course, until now, residents still remember the horror and heartbreak of May 4, 2007. Sometimes the sound of strong winds or distant storms is more than enough to bring back their traumatic memory of the tornado. But for the most part, Greensburg has turned that tragedy into a chance for a brighter future. It wasn't easy, and it was in no way intentional. But one way or another, that May 4, 2007 EF5 tornado helped shape Greensburg into a community that's stronger, smarter, and greener than ever before.